At 22, Mia was young, lonely, and searching for stability. I was married, 36, and suddenly questioning everything I thought I knew about loyalty, love, and happiness. What started as an innocent favor became a dangerous temptation I never saw coming. I knocked on Mia's door, toolbox in hand, fully expecting this to be a quick fix and nothing more. I mean, how complicated could it be? She'd said her internet wasn't working, and I'd fixed a router or two in my time. The hallway smelled faintly of cleaning supplies and takeout, and I could hear the muffled sounds of someone's TV down the hall. It was just a normal, quiet evening. At least, that's how it started. Mia answered the door with a warm smile, her long, dark hair tied up in a loose bun. She was wearing an oversized sweater that slipped off one shoulder, and her apartment smelled like vanilla and something faintly floral. "Thanks so much for coming over," she said, stepping aside to let me in. "I'm completely hopeless with this kind of thing." "Don't worry about it," I replied, brushing it off. "Shouldn't take long." Her apartment was small, but cozy. Fairy lights strung across the walls, mismatched furniture, a coffee table cluttered with books, and a steaming mug of tea. I immediately noticed how different it felt from my own place, where everything was meticulously organized and neutral. My wife, Lauren, liked things a certain way, minimalist, clean, and functional. Mia's place, on the other hand, felt alive, like it had a personality of its own. As I crouched next to her desk and started fiddling with the router, she plopped onto the couch nearby, hugging a throw pillow. "You're a lifesaver," she said. "I was supposed to submit something for work tonight, and of course this happens. Typical, right? Murphy's Law," I chuckled, keeping my focus on the blinking lights of the router. "Anything that can go wrong will." She laughed, and it was light and musical. "Yeah, that's my life in a nutshell." I kept working while she talked about her job, her friends, her struggles living alone. At first, I didn't think much of it. People talk when they're nervous, and I figured she was just filling the silence. But then, her tone shifted. "I don't know how you do it," she said softly, almost to herself. I glanced over my shoulder. "Do what?" She hesitated, as if she wasn't sure she should say it, then shrugged. "Have it all together. You've got a wife, a nice apartment, a steady job. It must feel good to have a life that's stable." I wasn't sure how to respond to that. "Well, it's not always as easy as it looks," I said lightly, trying to steer the conversation back to safe ground. But she didn't let it go. "No, seriously," she pressed. "You're the kind of person I've always wanted in my life. Someone strong, dependable. I've never really had that." Her words hung in the air, and I suddenly became hyper-aware of how quiet the apartment had gotten. The muffled TV sounds from the hallway seemed a million miles away, and all I could hear was the hum of the router and the faint rustle of fabric as Mia shifted on the couch. I stood up, brushing my hands on my jeans. "The router's fine," I said quickly, trying to change the subject. "I just had to reset it. You should be good to go." "Thank you," she said, standing too. She was closer than I realized, and I stepped back instinctively. Her eyes met mine, and there was something in them I couldn't quite place. Gratitude, maybe, but also something deeper, something raw. Before I could think of what to say, she added, "You know, it's been hard. Being here by myself. I don't have anyone to turn to when things go wrong. And then there's you, always so kind, always willing to help." "Mia," I started, but I didn't know how to finish. She smiled almost sadly. "I'm sorry. I'm not trying to make you uncomfortable. It's just, I really admire you. And sometimes I wish I had someone like you in my life." I swallowed hard. There it was, the line, the moment where everything shifts. My gut twisted as I thought of Lauren back at home, probably curled up on the couch with a glass of wine, waiting for me to come back. Lauren, who trusted me. Lauren, who had no idea that her husband was standing in another woman's apartment, feeling something. He shouldn't. "I should probably get going," I said finally, my voice tight. "Glad I could help with the internet." Mia nodded, but there was a flicker of disappointment in her eyes. Of course. Thank you again. As I walked back to my apartment, my mind was a whirlwind of thoughts. What just happened? Had I imagined it? Or was Mia really hinting at something more? And why did a part of me, no matter how small, feel flattered? I didn't say anything to Lauren when I got home. There was no reason to. Nothing had happened, not really. But as I sat on the couch beside her, pretending to watch the show she had on, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. A door had been cracked open, and now I was left wondering if I'd be strong enough to keep it shut. But the universe has a funny way of testing you when you're vulnerable. I thought that night with Mia was a one-off, a moment I could brush off and forget. I couldn't have been more wrong. It was only the beginning. The next day, I couldn't shake Mia's words. They echoed in my head, creeping in at the worst moments, during a morning meeting at work, while scrolling through emails, even when I was on the phone with Lauren. You're the kind of person I've always wanted in my life. It was harmless, wasn't it? Just a compliment. But it didn't feel harmless. It felt loaded, heavy with a meaning I didn't want to acknowledge. When I got home that evening, I tried to settle into my usual routine. Lauren was in the kitchen humming softly as she cooked dinner. The smell of garlic and herbs filled the apartment, and for a moment I felt grounded. This was my life, stable, predictable, safe. "Hey, how'd your day go?" she asked, flashing me a warm smile as I leaned against the counter. "Same old," I said, trying to sound casual. But even as I stood there, watching her stir the pot on the stove, my mind wandered back to Mia's apartment. The way her sweater had slipped off her shoulder, the way her voice had softened when she spoke about loneliness. It wasn't like I'd done anything wrong, but I felt guilty. Like I was keeping a secret, even if it was just a feeling. "Earth." "To Josh?" Lauren's voice snapped me out of it, and I realized she was looking at me with a curious expression. "Sorry," I said quickly. "What were you saying?" She frowned slightly, but she let it go. "I was just asking if you could grab the plates." As we ate dinner, I made a conscious effort to be present, to focus on Lauren. But something about her, something I couldn't quite put my finger on, felt distant. It wasn't her fault. It was mine. I was seeing her through a different lens, now comparing her in ways I knew I shouldn't. It wasn't until later that night, when we were lying in bed, that the cracks started to show. "You've been quiet lately," Lauren said softly, her voice cutting through the darkness of our bedroom. "I'm just tired," I lied, turning onto my side so she couldn't see my face. She didn't press, but I could feel the tension in the silence that followed. And as I lay there, staring at the wall, I couldn't help but wonder how we'd gotten to this point. Our marriage wasn't bad, not by any stretch, but it wasn't exciting either. We'd fallen into a routine, a comfortable rhythm that felt more like coasting than thriving. And then there was Mia. The thought of her sent a jolt of adrenaline through me, a rush I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't just about her looks, though, let's be honest, she was gorgeous. It was the way she made me feel, seen, admired, wanted. But was that enough to risk everything? A few days later, I ran into Mia again. I was on my way to take out the trash when I saw her in the hallway fumbling with a stack of packages. "Need a hand?" I asked before I could stop myself. Her face lit up when she saw me. "Josh, you're a lifesaver as always." I took a few of the boxes from her arms and followed her back to her apartment. She left the door open as she set the rest of the packages on her coffee table. "Sorry about the mess," she said, sweeping a few books and papers off the couch, to make room. "No worries," I said, placing the boxes down carefully. She looked at me, her eyes searching mine. "I've been meaning to thank you again for helping the other night. I don't know what I'd do without you." "It's no problem," I said, trying to keep my tone light. But there was something about the way she was looking at me, like I was the only person in the world who mattered in that moment. "Can I ask you something?" she said suddenly, her voice quieter now. "Sure," I said hesitantly. "Are you happy?" The question caught me off guard. "What do you mean?" In your marriage, she said, her gaze unwavering. Are you happy? I opened my mouth to respond, but the words wouldn't come. Because the truth was, I didn't know. I hadn't asked myself that question in a long time. Lauren and I had been together for so long that happiness felt secondary. We were partners, teammates. But was that the same as being happy? You don't have to answer, Mia said, taking a step closer. I see you, Josh, and I can't help but wonder if you see yourself the way I see you. You deserve to be happy. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. She was standing so close now that I could smell her perfume, a subtle, intoxicating blend of jasmine and something sweet. Mia, But before I could finish, her phone buzzed on the table, breaking the spell. She glanced at it, then back, at me. Sorry, I should get that, she said, stepping back. Yeah, of course, I said quickly, grateful for the interruption. As I walked back to my apartment, my thoughts were a tangled mess. Mia's question haunted me. Was I happy? Or had I been coasting for so long that I'd forgotten what happiness even felt like? When I walked through the door, Lauren was on the couch, scrolling through her phone. She looked up and smiled. Hey, how was your day? It was fine, I said automatically, my mind still elsewhere. She didn't press, but I could feel her watching me as I walked to the bedroom. And as I shut the door behind me, I leaned against it, letting out a long, shaky breath. Something had to give. I couldn't keep living like this, torn between two worlds, one stable but stagnant, the other new and dangerous. The line I thought I'd never cross was getting closer and closer, and I was terrified of what might happen when I reached it. Wish I could say I stopped thinking about Mia after that night, but that would be a lie. Every quiet moment seemed to invite her into my thoughts. It wasn't like I wanted to think about her, it just happened. I'd be sitting at work, staring at a spreadsheet, and suddenly I'd hear her voice in my head. You deserve to be happy. That question of hers had planted itself like a seed, and no matter how much I tried to ignore it, it kept growing. Was I happy? With Lauren? With my life? Or had I become so numb to everything that I didn't even know the difference anymore? The worst part was, Lauren started to notice. You seem distracted lately, she said one evening as we sat down for dinner. I glanced up from my plate, forcing a smile. Do I? It's just work, I guess. Busy week. She tilted her head, studying me. Is that all it is? Because it feels like there's something you're not telling me. The guilt hit me like a tidal wave. I shook my head quickly. No, of course not. It's just work stuff. She didn't look convinced, but she let it go. For now. But the distance between us was growing, and I could feel it like a physical weight in the room. Our conversations felt forced, our laughter rare. Even when we were together, it felt like we were miles apart. 2 weeks after that first night at Mia's, it happened again. I was coming back from the grocery store when I saw her in the hallway, struggling to balance a bag of laundry and a stack of papers. Here, let me help, I said, stepping forward before I could think twice. She smiled, that same warm, grateful smile that made my chest tighten in ways it shouldn't. You're a lifesaver, as always, she said, echoing her words from before. I followed her into her apartment, setting the bag down on the counter. She sighed, running a hand through her hair. I don't know how I'd survive without you around, Josh. Mia, I said, trying to keep my tone steady. You can't keep relying on me like this. She looked at me, her eyes wide and vulnerable. I know. I feel like you're the only person I can count on. You're the only one who really listens. The sincerity in her voice caught me off guard, and for a moment I didn't know what to say. You have people in your life, Mia, I said finally. Friends, family. She shook her head. Not like you. You're different. There it was again, that same intensity, that same pull that made it so hard to walk away. I should have left right then and there. I should have made some excuse and gone back to Lauren, to the life I was supposed to be living. But I didn't. Instead, I sat down on the edge of her couch, and before I knew it, we were talking. About her struggles at work, her insecurities, her fears of being alone. And somewhere along the way, I started talking too. I told her about the pressure I felt at work, the way Lauren and I had been drifting apart, the suffocating weight of always having to be the strong, dependable one. "I don't even know who I am anymore," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. Mia leaned forward, her gaze locked on mine. "I know exactly who you are, Josh. You're kind and patient and thoughtful. You're everything I've ever wanted in a person." Her words sent a jolt through me, and I felt my resolve slipping. She reached out, her hand lightly brushing mine. "Mia," I said, my voice strained. We can't." "I'm not asking for anything," she said quickly. "I just want you to know how much you mean to me." Her hand lingered for a moment longer before she pulled it away. The tension in the room was almost unbearable, and I knew if I stayed a second longer, I'd cross a line I could never uncross. "I should go," I said abruptly, standing up. Mia stood too, her expression a mix of hurt and understanding. "Of course. I get it." But as I turned to leave, she said one last thing that stopped me in my tracks. "You deserve to be happy, Josh. Don't forget that." That night I couldn't sleep. Lauren was curled up beside me, her breathing soft and steady, but my mind was a mess. Mia's words echoed in my head, and I couldn't shake the feeling that she saw something in me that Lauren didn't anymore. But whose fault was that? Had Lauren really changed? Or had I? I thought about our marriage, about how we used to stay, up late talking about everything and nothing, about how we used to laugh until our sides hurt. Somewhere along the way, we'd lost that. We'd fallen into a routine, and now it felt like we were just going through the motions. But did that mean it was over? Or was I just too cowardly to put in the effort to fix it? I didn't have any answers. All I knew was that Mia had stirred something in me, something I hadn't felt in years. And the more I tried to ignore it, the stronger it got. The next day, Lauren suggested we go out for dinner. "We haven't had a date night in ages," she said, her tone light but hopeful. I hesitated. The truth was, I felt so guilty that being alone with her sounded unbearable. But I nodded anyway. "Yeah, that sounds nice." We went to one of our favorite restaurants, the place where we used to go when we were first dating. The food was good, the wine even better, but the conversation felt stilted. Every time she smiled at me, I felt like a fraud. And then out of nowhere, she said, "I miss you." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. "I'm right here," I said, trying to deflect. "No," she said softly, shaking her head. "Not really. You've been somewhere else lately, and I don't know how to reach you." The guilt was overwhelming, and for a second, I thought about coming clean, about telling her everything. But I couldn't do it. Instead, I reached across the table and took her hand. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "I've just been stressed. Work, life, everything. But I'm here. I promise." She looked at me for a long moment, as if trying to decide whether to believe me. And then she smiled. "Okay," she said. "Let's start fresh." I nodded, but deep down, I knew it wasn't that simple, because no matter how much I wanted to leave Mia in the past, she wasn't going anywhere. Not yet.